Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions in the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. On this show, I interview lawyers ditching the billable hour and experts who can help attorneys move beyond billing time. Thanks to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel. Links to both in the show notes. More on them later, and use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED when signing up. You get 10% off, and it supports the show. The best way to support the show is to share it with someone you know. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. I'm thrilled to have with me here today attorney extraordinaire from up north for most of my U.S. listeners, although I think you're like our 12th Canadian person on the podcast, so there's a lot of us. Beau Atkins of Evolve Law, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
So just in case my listeners haven't seen what you're doing yet, just go ahead, give like your elevator pitch or, when you're talking to other lawyers, telling them what you do, how you do it.
Yeah, well, I usually start with the origin story in 2019 when I almost quit law altogether to start a different business and was sort of pulled back in when I realized as a lawyer, I had a monopoly on running a law office. And so I figured I exited my previous partnership. I had two partners and built my current office, Evolve Law, from the ground up using best business practices, not modeling myself after law firms. And that was my biggest frustration, were the inefficiencies I observed in almost every law firm I saw.
I want to know more about why you almost quit practicing law altogether. Tell us why.
I mean, at the time I was doing hourly billing. I was doing more jobs inside my law business as I should have been doing. I was in the process of hiring another associate attorney, and I was thinking about all of the things I wanted to find in an associate attorney. So I wanted someone who could market themselves, they could network, they could sell, they were competent as lawyers, they could manage their staff, they could bill, they could collect, they could do all of these things. And I identified 18 different hats. And then when I turned that introspectively, I realized, holy crap, I'm incompetent at 6 of these things. And I'm looking for someone else who can do them all. And then I looked at the best lawyers I knew and I'm like, they suck at all of these things. So what am I doing? And so I had so many entrepreneurial friends. And I looked and I saw that they had Dan Sullivan. He runs a business called Strategic Coach and a great business mind. He talks about 4 freedoms and wrote a great book called Who Not How, where I think he outlines these: the freedom of time, relationship, purpose, and money. And I felt like I don't have freedom of any of these things. I definitely don't have freedom of my time. I'm not making as much money as my electrician. My friend who's a contractor with his own electrical company, he's making more money than I am. He seems happier. What am I doing? I could just run a different business and be happier. And so that's where my mindset was. And I'm glad I turned it around because I feel like I found that in the practice of law.
I'm so glad you shared that with us, Beau, because I think a lot of lawyers go through their own version of that kind of crisis at some point. This is why we have the term recovering lawyer, right? Because it's a recovery, but I didn't have that. I didn't have that same kind of experience. I did have a similar revelation of there's got to be a better way to do it, right? And so I left my firm to go start my own practice. But I'm curious to hear from you when you decided that was what you were going to do. You mentioned you were billing time, but also it sounds like doing a lot more jobs that was not billable work, right? How did you come to designing the law practice that you wanted to have? Like, where did you go? Obviously, you read Dan Sullivan stuff. I listen to his podcast. That's a great drop, by the way, for my listeners, because I don't think we've talked about Dan Sullivan stuff before. So great resource. Everyone go check that out. So were you reading other books? Were there other resources? Because 2019, right pre-pandemic, there was a lot more like virtual law firm, great legal tech out there, non-legal tech. Like, where did you go to get the stuff, and how did you figure out how to design this practice that you have?
Well, it's funny because I was fairly deep in my exploration of another business, so deep that I was talking to rotisserie chicken franchise about bringing that to Canada. So I was getting out of the law, like as far away from the law business as possible, getting into restaurant. And I don't know why. I know now I have zero passion or anything towards that business. And I would have been just as miserable because I didn't have the direction. But when I determined I was going to start another business, frustrated with the one I had started 5 years before with a partner, I started picking up everything I could read. My curiosity peaked, and I was reading Jim Collins. So his stuff, Pat Lencioni, E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber was a great one. And then someone turned me to a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. And it follows the entrepreneur's operating system, or EOS. And when I read that, I'm just like, holy, this is like all of those business authors, and Vern Harnish is one, Scaling Up. All of those business authors, including Dan Sullivan, are all in EOS. And so here's a made to order system for you to just follow. And honestly, like following everything and building my business based on that has been a lifesaver.
Interesting. You know, I didn't hear any legal authors or about how to run a law firm in those books. Where
The
anything there?
closest thing, so there were a couple. Jordan Furlong, he's a Canadian
Oh,
academic, teaches at Suffolk,
he's great.
wrote a book called Law as a Buyer's Market. Richard Susskind's book, Tomorrow's Lawyer, was huge for me in just seeing, okay, you got to think about law differently. And then Jack Newton's book, The Client-Centered Law Firm. When I read that, I actually approached Jack afterwards and I'm like, did you read Traction? Because this is like the lawyer's version of that. And I found that was really helpful too in for the design. I read the Lawyerist Small Firm Roadmap. I definitely read a ton of law related books, but it was mostly, I made a pledge to myself. I was not going to do what other lawyers are doing. I'm not going to model myself on what I perceived to be a broken model. So I entered into it assuming these are all broken. I'm going to create it ground up as a business from an entrepreneur's mindset, not a lawyer's.
Ooh, ooh, I got the chills, man. That's good. But seriously, because first of all those books, I haven't read The Client-Centered Law Firm by Jack Newton, but I've heard great things and I kind of have a sense of what's in there. But all the authors that you talked about in those books, they bring in a lot of elements from outside the legal profession as well, right? So yeah,
Totally.
there's so much opportunity for innovation in law firms that we can learn from other businesses. In particular, what other businesses are billing their time? I mean, like maybe some other professionals, but like,
Maybe like just the inefficient accountants and the
right.
inefficient, really, like, I mean, you look at mechanics, they used to have that. Now, when you go to a mechanic, take your car, and if they're not giving you an estimate, you're going somewhere else. It's such a competitive industry. And if they find, I mean, that's an industry where you might look under the hood and say, okay, there's all these other things. Well, you get the client to, or customer to approve before you do that work. Otherwise you risk not getting paid. But lawyers don't do that same assessment and diagnosis right at the outset,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
think is a huge disservice.
Yeah. Yeah. And because in a way, the actual act of the billing the time and the tracking the time is tedious and bothersome, but it requires the least amount of lift in terms of thinking about something, right? It's like, okay, this took that long. That's how much it is, right? And so like it requires zero creativity, which I think lawyers are incredibly creative when we're given the constraints to be creative, right? But these other business models have been tried and tested in other industries. I mean, and you see the ones that rise to the top. And like the value-based pricing and the subscription models are the ones we all have experience with as consumers or even law firm owners or those of us in law firms buying technology for our law firms. We're not paying for how long we used that piece of software and then they bill us in arrears. We're paying the same price every month. Or, you know, if I need like some kind of like a court reporting service, even it's a flat fee. So like even in our practice, we're paying flat fees, we're paying subscription, yet we're still billing our time. It's unbelievable.
Oh, it's crazy, man. But like one of the worst things for me was the mindset it put me in. Like it got me to the point where whether I was hanging out with my girlfriend or I was taking my son to the park, I was like, okay, I can spare a quick 0.5 to the park. It's like, what world am I living in where I'm now applying a 12th of an hour increment to the quality time I'm spending with my son?
Yeah, yeah,
like I said, it was depressing.
yeah, yeah. So then I don't even think we said did we say your practice area yet? Like what your current practice area, and then was it the same or was it different at the previous
Yeah.
firm?
So I started doing family law basically right out of law school, which is the opposite of what I thought I was going to do while I was in law school. And a lot of that was sort of prompted by me going through a divorce and separation in third year law. So the entrepreneur side of me said, well, hey, this is a path of least resistance. I know this because I've studied it for my own case. Now I can help people through it. In the last couple of years as an entrepreneur I'm part of an organization called Entrepreneurs Organization, and I've really dug into my past, and I'm starting to realize a lot of the passion I have for helping people go through family law actually goes all the way back to my parents' divorce and some of my experiences through that. So I'm very passionate about helping people through family law situations, divorce and separation and parenting, and doing it so that at the end of the day, it's sustainable and everybody's okay.
We'll get back to that in a second, but you mentioned EO, and I want to ask you about it because I've not heard of that. But I'm assuming, and with a quick Google search, it looks like that's not like a bar association or a law society. Like it's like you're not with a bunch of other lawyers or with a bunch of other industry professionals.
There are very few lawyers in EO. And in fact, I only recently and within the last few weeks got connected to a lawyer portal where there's, I think, 70 lawyers. Now, this is an organization that I think has tens of thousands of people internationally. Chicago's got a really big chapter. In fact, I met with some of them while I was there for Tech Show. Milwaukee would likely have a chapter. Like it's all over the place, but it's business owners talking about business issues that can usually be applied across the board. Like lawyers think, I don't know why we think we're special, but there's nothing that unique or special about our businesses.
Now I've gotten a lot of good from bar associations over the years, but as soon as I stopped networking with lawyers and I started networking with everyone but lawyers, my business started to significantly improve in terms of business development, right? When you get out of the room of a bunch of lawyers and it exposes you to different ideas and different ways of thinking and not being trapped by the dogma of the way other lawyers think. So that's a really
Right.
great thing that you mentioned that you're involved in EO, because I don't think I've talked enough about on the podcast with other guests about how like get out of those groups of other lawyers. I mean, those of us that listen to Law Subscribed, we're a unique bunch, and especially my guests. So maybe hang out with these lawyers, but get
Yeah.
out there. Get
Um,
out there and hang out with other business owners and other industries for sure.
I think that's a really good point. And I credit my son was born in first year law. And so understandably, that took me away from a lot of the socializing and networking from law students. But my experience with that is when I was in law school with everybody, it was almost like a cesspool of stress. And I always people ask me why I love Tech Show and I love the legal tech conferences. And I think it's largely because there's a ton of different entrepreneurs there. It's not all lawyers. And the lawyers that are there are forward thinking, innovative, creative. And it's like you mentioned at the outset about creativity. A lot of things with the profession stifle that. We're restricted. We've got these, sometimes it's hard for us to think outside of the box.
Mhm.
But when you network with people who are not lawyers, that's all they're doing is thinking outside of the box.
Yeah, loved the digression and the tangent, bringing us back to the law practice. Evolve Law, love the name. Where did the name come from, and why choose a trade name?
Well, the trade name, so this is my second law office that I'm building. The first law office also didn't have it, had a trade name, not my own name. And the biggest reason was I didn't want someone coming to my office saying, I want the name on the door. I didn't want to have the issue where we get a partner in, now we have to change our letterhead and all this other stuff. I didn't want to even have those discussions. I wanted to say, okay, let's build something that's scalable, something that you can monetize and you can create a value behind the brand that's more than just attached to a person. And so that was a big thing because essentially building a business, planning for an exit. Not that I'm anywhere near where I'm planning an exit, but we're just getting off the ground. In terms of the name, man, that's been one of the hardest things for me. I've probably started a dozen businesses since high school. Planning a name is one of the hardest things. And for this, I actually have to give credit to an ex-girlfriend came up, said something about it, and I'm like, hey, I like that. And it stuck.
So, you mentioned you started a lot of companies in your youth. I didn't start a dozen, but I had a million ideas, and I did start a few. So I do wonder if there's something there about like, talk about evolve law. Let's talk about nature versus nurture. Okay. So you didn't know we'd be talking about Darwin on Law Subscribe today. So nature versus nurture, right? Like you've been entrepreneurial for a very long time. I have that bug too. I've had it since I was a kid. I know for a fact that one of my grandparents was very entrepreneurial. Do you think this is one of these things that's like it's inherent in us, or is it something that we learn that we're exposed to? I mean, it's certainly both. But I'm curious to know, in your experience, having been an entrepreneur for a long time, was it always in you, or was it something you were exposed to that made you realize you could make things from scratch, and then you did?
I think it's in us. I really think that a lot of it, I'm not saying you can't learn it or develop it, because I certainly think you can. But Reid Hoffman has a really good quote about an entrepreneur building an airplane on the way down after jumping off a cliff or something along those lines. Like they're the ones who just dive in. And when I said I was really in 2019 struggling, I've identified I have a lawyer brain and I have an entrepreneur brain. And I think that's characteristic for most lawyers. Most great lawyers will walk in a room and see nothing but risk and issue. Most great entrepreneurs won't see any risk or issues, but they'll see all the opportunity. And if you're on either side of the spectrum, you're blind. You got blinders onto the other.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I can't remember what it was, but there was like, I listened to This Week in Startups with Jason Calacanis, and, I think he said one time he like dropped like a percentage of like only like 8%. I'm just making it up, but it's like a smaller percent than you think of the population are entrepreneurs. And it does make me think about, and he got that number from somewhere, I'm sure, but it does make me think about how a lot of the people I've had on my show are, whether they identify with it or not, are in some way kind of neurodivergent. And that doesn't necessarily mean autistic. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm dyslexic, though I've never been properly diagnosed. Like, that's a form of neurodivergence, right? So I wonder if being an entrepreneur itself is like a form of neurodivergence from the way most other people think.
I think absolutely it is. I mean, I've heard the percentage 2% or less. And I mean, the more I hang around entrepreneurs, the more I realize and it can be viewed at as a gift. By a lot of people think, oh, it's a gift. I think in many ways it's a curse, because you look at there's a lot of serious mental health issues, depression, anxiety, suicide, alcohol, drug addiction with the entrepreneurial
Oh, I thought you were
population.
talking about lawyers there for a second.
Oh,
Oh, wait.
lawyers too. But in fairness, maybe being a lawyer is also neurodivergent in a lot
I
of
think
ways
so.
too, right? Like I think you could maybe classify both as being neurodivergent on different areas. But yeah, absolutely. I think the entrepreneurs I know and I associate with, I think there's definitely a different breed.
Yeah, yeah. I just think differently. So, man, going back to the law firm now. So we got another tangent. Evolve Law. How is it then? Because you didn't want to be billing your time. Like, were you? Did you start billing time when you started this practice, or were you always doing what you're doing from the beginning?
No, so I started with flat fees. So I wanted to look at my services as if they were products on a shelf. So I essentially identified everything I do as a family lawyer. And I figured out there were maybe 60 or 70 different services that I could clearly package from a start to a finish. And once I could do that, then I could price it accordingly. And sometimes it's based on a range, but essentially we've been doing flat rate from the very beginning. For attorneys have never billed for a second of their time. So I have all of my lawyers on the team don't even know what it's like to charge for a second of their time or
What
think
a great,
about
what a great employer you are, Beau.
it. I
Would
push them hard, and I've got a phenomenal team. I can't say enough great things about my team. Without my team, there is no Evolve. I don't have the time to do podcasts or be in Chicago for a conference. So
and you had mentioned too, speaking of your team, you had mentioned how, you're building a practice with the exit in mind. It doesn't mean you're going to sell it tomorrow and your team needs to be worried. It's just, this is what we do as lawyers too. And whether it's like for me, like a transaction, or for you, a new divorce case, we're thinking about the end and the multiple permutations that may have. And we're strategically thinking about what could we do now to get a better result at the end, right? And so using a trade name like you're using, so that the exit is going to be more valuable for you, even though the exit might not be for decades, is so important. It's a big recurring thing here where I'm glad you have a trade name. Otherwise, I was going to have to give you some crap, because whenever a lawyer comes on who's doing something innovative, I'm like, and your firm name is your name? Come on. What are you
well, I
doing?
mean, the reality is right now we haven't gotten really scratched the surface on alternative business structures.
Mhm.
But I mean, at some point when you can have an IPO or a publicly traded law firm, who's who are they going to invest in? Smith, Frank, and Jones, or a trade, right? That's it, with processes, with everything baked in. So it was sort of that was in mind, is if this was going to be a publicly traded company, how do its systems have to operate? What does it have to look like?
And that's why Subscription Attorney LLC is my firm trade name, because you never know what could
Love it.
happen in the future, right? This is my episode, my periodic reminder during at least once an episode, where I tell people, go to the Substack, go to www.lawsubscribe.com and subscribe so you can watch the video and you'll see what I did there for everybody. Okay, so going back to your pricing, which this is the sexy reason why like my listeners really tune in too, is because they want to know, how can I ditch the billable hour? What are the ways that I could do it? And of course, I'm an advocate of subscription. You're doing some really great things with flat fee. You're in like the 50 of us now. I believe it or not, I think there's almost 50 law firms that we have pricing stated on our website.
Wow,
Uh,
awesome.
I know, and I've had most of them on my podcast. Now you included. So you have a pricing tab, which is great. And you can click on that tab. And for everyone who's listening, there's a link in the show notes, but also evolvelaw.ca/pricing if you want to get right there. And you have on here a bunch of, quote, off the shelf family law services price list, which is amazing. But also something I see is like a little screenshot here that you're using Calendly. We love Calendly
Yeah,
on the Law Subscribe podcast. It's probably my number one most used tool. And you have here that you don't just do free consultations, standard booking, $199, and that's for like a 30-minute increment. So like you're not billing your time. It's like, this is what a 30-minute phone call costs with us, right? And then you have an emergency request call for within 2 business hours, $499. And your prices are always subject to change. These episodes are evergreen, but that's amazing that you're doing this. Okay, you want to talk to us in 2 hours? We will make a lawyer available for you, but it's going to cost you more than twice as much as what our regular consultation will cost. And so lawyers talk about this, but so few of them are doing it. And it's one of the biggest complaints I hear when I'm trying to convince people at a CLE, you should stop billing your time. Well, what if my client needs to get a hold of me right away? Charge
right.
them. Charge them for it. And you're doing that. So how is that working for you?
Oh, it's amazing. And with those initial consultations too, you referenced 30 minutes, but what happens is when a client books that, it's 15 to 30 minutes. It says 15 to 30. But the first disclaimer, or the first thing I say to them is, there's no clock running. We're on this phone call as long as it takes to figure out the next steps and answer all your burning questions.
Mm-hmm.
So we set the stage with a very relaxed tone. We want to get through everything, give them some comfort. But what I find is, even taking away that 30 minutes and saying, hey, we're on this call as long as it takes. I've been on those calls for 50 minutes, but my average is probably 22. So it's one of those things where lawyers criticize or are skeptical about flat fees, thinking, oh, clients are going to take advantage of that. Thinking that clients really want to talk to their lawyers. They don't. They would rather talk to so many other people than their lawyers. What they want is to get the information, have confidence, feel supported. And if you can do that efficiently, they're not going to take advantage of it, in my experience.
And then for the emergency calls, so that could have two different purposes, right? That could have the purpose of don't call us and expect a response right away. And even if nobody pays for it, it's doing its job, right? Because no one's
Right.
expecting a call right away. But then the other side is, yeah, I'll be willing to make the time, but I need to make sufficient money, like to handle
Yeah,
that.
it's
So are both of those working for you?
oh yeah, totally. It's all by design. Everything, there's a lot of design thinking in what we do. We don't, I've wanted to take away as many of the distractions from my entire team as possible. So very few of you can't reach anyone on our team by phone. It goes to a call service.
When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at 650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form and scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show.
We schedule our consultations on specific days. We schedule client calls on other specific days. So we're very intentional with how we arrange our calendars.
I mean, calendaring is like one of the most important things that you do. I have to imagine, since I see that you're doing some kind of Calendly integration here, that you just put everything in your calendar. Like literally, right? Doesn't everything have to go in your calendar to make it work?
Definitely.
Like, are you in Microsoft's platform, Google Workspace? Like, what's your platform of choice?
Yeah, so we do a lot with Microsoft Forms. Do you want me to talk about my whole tech stack? I can.
Sure,
Well,
sure. Yeah, let's do it.
I'll probably leave a couple out just because we do have such a deep tech stack. I'll forget some, but we use Smith AI as a call service. Calendly, obviously, Microsoft Forms, Clio Manage. We're exploring a HubSpot or another company called Zoho. We're not sure which CRM we're going to migrate to. Clio Drafts is a big one. Changed name just at Tech Show from Lawya to Clio Drafts. We use that. AltFee helps us with our pricing. They were the winner of this startup competition. So we're looking at how we can roll that into our processes. Power Automate, Teams. So the full Microsoft 365 suite, we've subscribed to Copilot. For some of the other things we're using different AI tools for, we're playing around with those. I know I'm missing some. We're exploring Fidoo. That's actually I'm in Saskatoon, Canada, so that's where it was started. And Kim, of course, Kim Bennett in Atlanta. So used them. We've been working with Hona, formerly Milestones. So it's pretty deep. And in fact, a big part of my role as CEO going to Tech Show wasn't so much to go for the programming, but was really to connect with all of our vendors and make sure that all of my team's concerns get relayed to the powers that be, that I still have those connections, that most of those places I can shoot a text message if we encounter problems.
Yeah, I mean, Fidoo, friends of the show. Obviously, Kim was my first guest, and she's just like I think until I had this podcast, she was the most outspoken person about the subscription model for legal
Right.
services. And she's still she does a lot of great stuff with that. But now, I mean, Fadoo is a big focus for her. And so I'm glad to know that you're considering Fadoo, because that means that, they make it really easy for you to do subscription-based pricing too. So in addition to the flat fee related stuff, now, now imagine, I mean, you don't want to overwhelm with options, right? But I could just imagine on this pricing page, you've got your standard booking, emergency requests, or, X amount a month for scheduled calls,
Well,
right?
and we do have it on that page, we do have a subscription option. So
Oh,
there is a service.
oh
In
yes.
in my experience, there's a lot of friction with that.
Mm-hmm.
People don't want to continually pay their family lawyer. And in fact, a lot of times it detracts from what we're trying to do, because we're trying to say, here's the very next step from here to here. We'll have you done within 3 months, and we should be able to get you through all these steps. Now, one thing we do offer are payment plans. So it's not so that we try to do that to increase accessibility, but we found it was difficult when we're piecing out the services and products we offer as it is, for us to either manage the subscriptions or for people to even want to get on them.
You reminded me one piece you're leaving out, although this might be answered with the other stuff you said, because it could be through Clio. But how are you handling payments?
I actually don't know a lot about how we do it now. I mean, I was obviously involved in the design of it, but
Mm-hmm.
between marketing, sales, and finance and legal ops, I'm no longer in the lead of those teams. So they've evolved beyond me.
Hey, he said the
Yeah,
name. He said the name.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Shameless plug. But for all of so we have task lists for all of the services that we provide.
Mm-hmm.
And inside of those are built-in billing milestones. So once we do the first third of the work, the lawyer reassigns a billing task to finance, who just bills it. And so there's very little involved for the lawyer to do. They look, they check things off. Did we do these things? Okay, send the bill. And it all happens pretty organically.
Going back to the payment plan thing, which is great that you do that, right? Because it makes legal services more accessible. If you were to reframe the payment plan as a membership model, not necessarily a subscription that's ongoing forever, but if you reframe it as a membership model, it's, here are your subscription benefits. Here's your member benefits when you become a client of Evolve Law at this monthly fee that's capped at X amount once you've hit that X amount, right? And sure, there's things happen, like, I don't know exactly how you do all the flat fees when, maybe up to trial, or, other types of things. But I think there's a way you could reframe that where they're like a member of the firm as a client, a subscriber, if you will, because the way then you reframe all of the legal services you're providing now become subscription benefits, and you might find that you have other value that you could give them that you weren't necessarily thinking about advertising, but now it's a subscription benefit when they're on that payment plan. So just what do you
Yeah,
think about that?
I've thought a lot about that, and back to, we had a fairly lengthy discussion about this in Chicago, and it really had me thinking. I think if we were to segment our products and services that we offered, so we weren't getting as deep in, the subscription model might fit. But our reality is we're still running trials, we're still running applications and things that are costing tens of thousands of dollars, where that, I think, would be the hardest place for me to implement both of these at the same time. I think if I were to explore implementing subscriptions, I would almost have to move away from those and set my focus, which I'm not necessarily opposed to. You've definitely got my wheels turning and thinking about how I could apply that.
Another thing I'm thinking of in terms of ways that I've talked about with other family law attorneys, how a subscription could work, is maybe during because there are some other lawyers who do like segmented fees based on where you are in the case for family law, for other litigation. But there are things that happen after, if you go to trial and then you have the decree, or you have the marital settlement agreement if you end up settling. And when you're done with the court-related stuff, there's still, alimony or maintenance or spousal support or whatever you call it. There's compliance with child-related things that they have to follow. So there's all this compliance post-divorce that I think would fit well on like a maintenance plan, like a subscription maintenance plan style thing, right? So like, yeah, if anything happens, they don't comply, even if it's just something low, like $100 a year, we're just going to check in with you once a year and we're going to make sure, okay, they are complying. And even just like the thumbs up for $100 once a year to check in, that, clients might pay that. And then they're still your client. They're still thinking of you. Other things come up. They might bring you more work that you charge for outside of that subscription, because the subscription is just the annual maintenance plan. We're just going to check in with you once a year and make sure your former spouse your ex is now in compliance, right, with everything, right? So I think I think you could do a post lawsuit subscription maintenance plan. What do you think about something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, because we already do have a product, which is post trial or post pre-trial or whatever, where we assess it, because there's different levels. Some of them we charge $10,000 because there's a lot of work involved. And I think that's the difficulty I would have is right now with the way we provide services is scaling it so that sort of one size fit all or one size fit most even, because
two or three tiers, right? You could
right.
segment, and do they fall into one of these categories? And if they maybe sign up in tier 2, but their needs are tier 3, that's why you have 3 tiers. Boom, up to the 3rd tier, right? We originally priced you at this. It's really outside the scope of this because you're talking to us every week. That's really a tier 3 client, and in order to continue to provide the service, you have to go up to tier 3, and then they start paying you more every month.
Yeah, and I think our subscription model does have 2 or 3 tiers. But again, it was a lot easier for me to visualize what the start and finish is, not have anything sort of open-ended. This is what it's going to take, and then to price that out, than it was to think about sort of what that ongoing relationship would be. But it's, like I said, it's definitely piqued my interest, and it's something that I think deserves a lot more thought and consideration.
As Evolve Law evolves and grows and becomes more than just a family law practice, maybe you never will, but I'm thinking, if, maybe until the kids are all 18, that there is an ongoing relationship for ongoing compliance with the marital settlement agreement or the divorce decree or whatever it is, it's an ongoing relationship. Things come up that the ex like does something crazy or runs to, I was going to say runs to Canada, but you're in Canada.
Exactly.
Like goes to Mexico.
Bring them on.
Goes to Mexico with the kids, and like you down here, and you're like it's way longer than they were supposed to have time with them. I just feel like there is a possibility for that. And when they're subscribed to you and you're their lawyer, maybe, throughout those until all the kids are 18, at least whatever the age of adulthood is in Canada, they have estate planning needs. They maybe buy or sell a house. There's so many other legal things that they're going to have that if you're their lawyer, they're going to bring to you first. You could either refer those things out, or you could find a way to evolve and offer those products too.
And that's the one thing in my view, that's what most lawyers get wrong. And as they grow, they think, okay, I'm going to add more areas of practice, which I think in a lot of ways is completely counterintuitive to the economies of scale. Again, turning to the automotive industry, that's the direction. You don't have a mechanic who will do absolutely everything on your vehicle. I mean, you do have them, but they're generally not as successful as you have places that will just change your oil, places that will just rotate your tires and change your tires, places that just do transmissions. And I feel like I will never want to create under the same roof an office that does more than just family.
Can you start a second law firm?
I could start Evolve Criminal Law. I could start Evolve potentially.
I agree.
But it would be under a different roof and geared specifically at that client. So when they're sitting in that waiting room, this waiting room was designed for someone who's buying the house. This waiting room is designed for someone signing a will. Because I think that's one thing that's one of the problems with a lot of law firms is they don't segment their market. They don't know who their target client is. They just say they practice door law. any law that comes in the door is a potential client. And
Yeah.
I've found that we've got a referral network where I find every referral I send out, we've loosely kept track. I'll get 5 referrals back for one, because there's so few lawyers that send out those referrals.
Yeah, and I think referrals are one of the ways that we handle it, though there's not like a great solution to that. I've had Overture on the podcast because they also have a law firm that uses subscription, the founders of that company. I've had, not at the time of recording, but at the time of publication, there will be an episode with Lexamica, which was another Startup Alley competitor at Tech
Right.
Show. They are trying to solve the referral problem. Um,
I was interested by their platform, and actually I've got them in my notes to contact.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a problem that still needs solving. But I also think that, and what I'm trying to do with this podcast in a way, is inspire lawyers to go be that subscription attorney or be that alternative business model attorney in whatever practice area that they want to be in so that they're predictable, transparent, affordable for that market. And so then I'd have somebody that I could refer my clients to when,
Right.
when it's outside my competence level. Though I do mile wide, inch deep law, right? Like I will do a lot of different practice areas, but because my clients are already paying me $20 a month, they come to me before there's a problem. It's not access to
Right.
justice. It's avoidance for the need for justice in the first place, right? And you can't charge as much for that. You just can't do it. Like I do a lot of prenups, but I'm not going to do a divorce case. I'm
Right.
just not going to do it. And frankly, I think the value that I could sell to my clients for that I don't make money when you get divorced means I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this prenup is amazing and
Right.
that lawyers can't make money, can make as little money from it in divorce as possible. Because
Mhm.
I have no financial benefit for that. I don't do it. Same thing with any of my other settlements or
Right.
negotiations. If I can't settle this for you, I'm not going to make any money if we go to court. So I'm going to do
Yeah. No,
everything I
that
can
makes
to
sense.
settle, but I can't charge as much money for that. So I
Mm.
charge $20 a month so that they come to me for all of their legal things. And if something gets more than a few inches deep, and I'm not competent in that, I could help with a letter of intent. If you're raising a $6 million round, I am not a startup lawyer. I will refer you to a startup lawyer. But that startup lawyer should charge flat fees. Otherwise, the clients who hire me don't want to pay billable hour fees. And there's not enough
Oh,
lawyers like us who have our pricing on our website. So
right.
I think there's something there with the referrals and the network. But even like in the future, whether it's Evolve Law as a brand, and you could subscribe to Evolve Law, but when you need family law, you go to the Evolve Family Law. When you need criminal, you go that. I think there's something there with other ways to do a subscription too, and it might even be a distributed franchise model rather than all under one roof. But I think there is value to clients for subscribing to a lawyer and knowing that they could go to that law firm broadly for to
No,
just to
and
get all their stuff done.
I definitely agree with you there. I think one of the things that pushed me to this is getting really deep into what we sell as lawyers. Like
Mm-hmm.
when people come to us, what are they buying? And I think a lot of people, I mean, the billable our lawyer is going to say, well, they're buying our time. Nobody wants your time. And when I got into it, Jordan Furlong deserves a lot of credit for that. He wrote a blog post in 2012 saying lawyers are selling peace of mind. And I say, when I was diving in, I figured that we sell certainty, some degree of certainty. It's not 100% certainty, but it's somewhere between 0 and 100%
Mm-hmm.
is what clients are coming to us. They want a will, they want a prenup, they're buying a house. No matter what it is, they want some semblance of certainty. And most lawyers can't even deliver that when they talk about their own fees. And that's what the flat fee model was intended to do, is say, and our guarantee to clients is you will never receive an unexpected legal bill,
Yeah.
because we don't charge anything that we don't talk to a client about first.
That would scare that sentence is going to scare some lawyers. Right.
And sometimes we lose, but we build that into everything. So, and
Just
I'll readily tell a client, you might end up paying me more than you would pay an hourly rate lawyer. And I think we're probably at a point where we're somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4, we do better than we would if we were on an hourly rate. We lose money on the other quarter to a third.
Yeah,
Uh,
as long as you win
built
more
in.
than you lose, that's all that
It,
matters in this model. Yeah,
it makes it sustainable.
right, right. I one of the first CLEs I gave in the subscription model, I talked about how I do $20 a month and $50 a page for those subscribers, and somebody said, "Well, I do fractional general counsel work, but like, what happens when you get to some page and it's got all these complicated clauses, indemnification, all these things? I'm spending all this time on that page." It's like, well, yeah, well, okay, but how much time did you spend on the other 19 out of those 20 pages?
Yeah, exactly.
If it was all boilerplate, you're winning on that document. You're winning, right?
Yeah.
And eventually your time savings is so much that you stop even thinking about it in terms of winning because you don't have to spend a lot of time on something. You could just do it and get it done as quickly as possible. And then everything becomes a win and you don't have to worry about how much time are we spending on these things anymore.
Well, then it also builds in a mindset to make things more efficient. So there's a lot of software out there that you can plug this stuff into and say, highlight any unusual terms in this agreement. So now you're shaving your review to even further. I mean, of course, you want to be careful what you're doing with AI. We all know, like, obvious disclaimer that you always have to give, but we're always figuring out ways. How can I do this quicker? How can I make this more efficient? Because I mean, that's part of running an efficient business.
As we start to wrap up the interview here, I do just want to get one more question in about the pricing and stuff as it relates to the client. So, are you seeing clients who come to you after they've spent a lot of money on a billable hour attorney and the total like what's their experience like? Like, what are your clients' thoughts on this model? Because I guess I also want to know if you're their only lawyer they've ever hired. What are their thoughts? Because maybe they're just like, well, all lawyers should charge this way.
Well, yeah. So I've hired a lot of people. Clients hate getting dinged for phone calls and emails, especially ones they didn't send that are between the other lawyers, and so they're very suspicious of the system and skeptical. And one of the things I tell them is, we always want you to feel supported. Contact us if you have questions. And I don't think a lot of other, like, lawyers who are billing by the hour, I don't think their clients feel that same level of support because they're worried to reach out. They're worried about the bill that they're going to receive. Whether they've had a lawyer or not, they've had friends or they've heard stories or they've watched TV and they know how it works and how those legal bills can quickly get way out of control. And in my experience, sometimes you'll have clients who will not reach out to you when they really should. Now they end up in a deeper hole than they ever would have been had they just reached out. And it really saves a lot of work and stress for me and my attorneys. But it also makes sure, like I said, clients feel like they actually have support and they have some semblance of certainty in their chaotic existence.
So before I ask you my last question, I'll just give you a sort of an open-ended one, which is like anything else that you have to share with a lawyer who's on the fence of, I don't want to be billing time anymore, but I can't not think of making money any other way as a lawyer. Like, what's some words of wisdom or advice you have for them?
Get curious. Ask the people who are doing it. I nerd out on this stuff. I would gladly hop on a call or a Zoom call. I know you are very generous with your time. You didn't have to come up to me and have a conversation in Chicago, reach out for this. You're very generous if someone wants to. Kim Bennett is very generous with her time. There's a big community of people who are not only saying that it's possible for every area of law, every lawyer, but they're doing it in every area of law and just being more and more creative. So get curious.
Great. We'll end the formal interview there. My last question for you, Beau. The reason why everyone sticks through to the end of the episode, is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
There's no way it's a sandwich. I mean, but I don't have a why. I've just never.
Come on, bring it.
Why
Let's see
is it
those
not a sandwich?
thinking on your
Because
feet skills. Let's do it.
it's not bread. It's a bun. It's not a sandwich the same way a hamburger is not a sandwich.
You have a kid, so you'll understand this. When my kid was like 2 and a few months, she was a very early talker. She's tiny, but she was an early talker. I was grilling burgers and I was plating them. I was going back and forth from the grill to inside on the plates. And my daughter says to me, like when everyone else was plated and I had not quite sat down yet, she goes, "Daddy, eat your sandwich," pointing at the hamburger. So I'm just saying, a hamburger does look more like a sandwich. You'll grant me that, right?
I'll give you that for sure. Now, I guess the qualifier, when I was a kid, we didn't always have buns. So sometimes you used a piece of bread to wrap a hot dog. Unless that piece of bread breaks in two or you're using two pieces of bread, still not a sandwich.
Okay,
I
well,
may consider two pieces of bread with hot dogs in the middle a hot dog sandwich.
okay. You're the second person who's actually said that in like 80 something interviews. So, all right. Well, if stick around just for a quick second, we're almost at time. But if anybody wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's a great place to start.
All right. Beau Atkins, again, thanks so much for coming on the podcast Law Subscribed.
Thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
And that's our show. Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for being sponsors. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with somebody you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email Kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.